My name is Erica Kleitz. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm an extension educator with Michigan Sea Grant. And we're really glad you've joined us tonight for Harmful Algal Blooms 101. So we're going to start with a quiz about what HABs are, what they look like. So we'll see what you know or already, or just go ahead and guess about HABs. So in this photo, is this a harmful algal bloom? And you can just put in chat yes or no, whatever you think. All right, looks like we've got mostly no. So that is correct. This is not a harmful algal bloom. Does anyone know what this is? All right, some different guesses. Yeah, so this is filamentous algae. So you'll hear a little bit more about algae later in the talk today. So, but that's what is in this photo. So it has a lot more structure than cyanobacteria does. Okay, here's another one for you. So, is this a harmful algal bloom? What do you think? Yes or no? All right, I see a little bit of disagreement, some no's, some yeses. So this is also not a harmful algal bloom. Does anyone know what this is? Yeah, some people got it. Yep, this is pollen. So it's a little bit hard to tell in this photo, but it's a bit yellowier than HABs often are. And so when there's a lot of pollen coming out from trees and then falling onto the lake, this is actually Lake Michigan in this photo, it can get concentrated together and look quite similar to a harmful algal bloom. So yeah, good guess. All right, how about this one? Is this a HAB? All right, yeah, I see a lot of yes answers. Yes, that's correct. So here's a little photo with a little bit more of a blown up image. So yeah, you can see that it looks more like spilled paint. It's very green throughout the water. In this photo, you can actually see in the back, here's some plants floating on top of the water. But what we're looking at here is just in the water itself. All right, here's another one. Is this a HAB? All right, I see a lot of no's. You're correct. Does anyone know what this is? Yeah, I see some correct answers. So yeah, these are some aquatic plants, like watermeal, duckweed. So sometimes from far away, if you look at a bunch of these on the water, it can look really similar to a HAB. But if you look up close, that's why I wanted to show you this other image in a bucket with a less dense example, you can see the individual outline of these plants. So even though they're small, they're distinct in that way, in a way that harmful algal blooms are not. All right, one last one for you. Is this a HAB? All right, I see a lot of yes answers, and you are correct. Yes, this is the western basin of Lake Erie, an area that often has HABs every year. And you can see in this photo the way that the green is kind of throughout the water. You can see it even in the wave crashing on the shore. So that's more the image that we're looking for. So hopefully this was helpful for you in kind of getting your mind tuned into what we're looking out for about HABs. So I just wanted to go over a couple of main points about HABs. So what a HAB is, it's an area of algae that grows rapidly in an area. It's visible without a microscope. So often we'll see some really pretty photos later of algae with a microscope. So this is an area of a bloom where we can see it without a microscope. It's only harmful if the algae are capable of producing toxins. So if the algae can't produce toxins, it's not a HAB. And typically people say it looks like spilled paint, pea soup, floating scums, mats, sheens, clumps, or streaks. So that's more the image that we're looking for. For HABs in Michigan, all HABs in Michigan are from cyanobacteria, also called blue-green algae, because Michigan is freshwater. So I know we have potentially people joining us today from other states and even countries. And so if that's the case, it may not be true for your area. But in Michigan, the Great Lakes, inland lakes, rivers, and streams, that's all freshwater. So the HABs that we get are associated with cyanobacteria. And there's multiple species of cyanobacteria that can produce toxins. So I wanted to show you some other photos here. So on the left, you've seen this photo already. Then the next one, it's kind of more diffuse, just sort of towards the edge. A bloom. This bloom is more blue-green in color. And then this one, the hab here it's not these plants floating on the surface, but this kind of green-yellow color underneath. So you can see that it is relatively variable in terms of what a hab looks like. All right, so the next thing we're going to go through is some myths that you may or may not have in your mind about HABs and kind of do a little bit of myth busting. So our first one is that all algae is harmful. So you might think if I have algae in my pond or my lake or the Great Lakes, it must be a bad thing. So the reality is that algae can be and often is good. So algae as phytoplankton form the foundation of most aquatic ecosystems. Algae are simple photosynthetic organisms that are found in a wide range of environments and has been on Earth for actually millions to a billion of years. So a long, long time. So you can see in this graphic here, we're showing the base of the food chain, which is made up of algae and other things. And then we go all the way up to fish and eventually humans. So algae are often a very important part of our marine freshwater environments. So another myth that you might have is that all algae contain toxins. And the reality here is that most algae do not produce toxins. So most types of algae, like green algae, filamentous algae that we saw a picture of earlier, they don't produce toxins. So they're not capable of becoming a harmful algal bloom. It's the cyanobacteria that can produce toxins. Another myth you might have about HABs is that all HABs are green in color. And the reality is HABs are often green, so the most common colors are bright green or blue-green, but they can be blue, red, pink, purple, milky white, so there can be some variation. You can see in these photos, on this first one, there's kind of a red-brown color. This one is a mix of green and red. And over on the right, this one is like a bright blue color. So you don't want to, it's not always, they're not always green, but it is certainly one of the more common colors, but they can be other colors as well. So another myth is that you can tell whether toxins are present by the appearance of the bloom. So the reality is that to know whether toxins are present, you need to do chemical testing. So testing by a lab is the only way to know what toxins are present and what their concentration is. This isn't something we can know just by looking at the bloom. It doesn't matter if you're a scientist that works in that area or not. You need to do testing to know what's there. So because testing often involves some kind of delay, because we usually have to take samples off-site, things that you want to look for is just this appearance of the HAB, and then be aware that the highest toxin levels are generally going to be found in scums or mats. So especially if you're seeing that, typically those are going to be the highest toxin levels. And also generally, if you have clear water that's next to a HAB, that's generally not going to be harmful to people. So those are just some general rules of thumb, but otherwise we have to send samples out for testing to know for sure. Okay, another myth you might have is that HABs don't change over time. You might think if it's on the beach by my house today, that means it'll be here tomorrow or next week. And that's really not the case. So because HABs are living, they're collections of living organisms, they do change over time. The look and size of the bloom can change. It can appear and disappear quickly. And HABs also move with winds and currents. So especially in an inland lake, for example, you could have a HAB on one side of the lake that over time moves to another side of the lake, and it could even go back and forth. So though we like knowing, something like, well, it's bad today, but will it be better to swim tomorrow? That's really hard to predict with HABs because they do change a lot over time, and they do move and appear and disappear from different places. Okay, I wanted to touch on a couple of less common situations about HABs. So I'm going to talk in a little bit about the general things that are contribute to HABs occurring, which is usually warm water and high levels of nutrients. But it's also true that HABs can occur in cold water. They can occur in nutrient poor areas like Lake Superior. And they can occur in rivers and streams, not just lakes. So I just want to mention these just so if you see something somewhere else and you wonder, could this be a HAB, but it's cold water or it's not a heavy nutrient area, it still could be a HAB. So cyanobacteria are very ancient organisms, as I mentioned, and so they've adapted over time to many different types of environments, which is why we can see so much variability in where they occur. All right, so within Michigan itself, where do we see HABs occurring? So on this map, every county that's green is one that has had reported blooms from 2017 to 2022. So you can see that it covers most counties of the state. HABs are generally more common in the Southern Peninsula. They're more common in shallow lakes and lakes with an impoundment. So like a man-made lake that has a dam or something like that. In the Great Lakes, because that first map I just showed you was for inland lakes, this is for the Great Lakes, we see HABs in certain areas recurring over time. And this includes western basin of Lake Erie, Lake St. Clair, the Saginaw Bay, as well as locations in Lake Michigan, Lake Superior, and Ontario. So while we're talking about the Great Lakes Basin, I wanted to remind everyone that wherever you are, if you're in Michigan, you are part of the Great Lakes watershed. So every drop of water that falls in Michigan eventually ends up in one of the Great Lakes. And that's what you can see depicted on this map. So on this map, this gray color here, all of the water that falls in that area is flowing into Lake Huron. In the green color, all that water is flowing into Lake Michigan. In the yellow, it's flowing into Lake Erie. So you can see how large these areas are. And this just kind of brings home the point that whatever we do in Michigan really matters because all of the water and ecosystems, everything that's happening on the land is also going to impact our Great Lakes. All right, finally wanted to show a little bit of data on reports of HABs over time. So you can see that the number of reports, potential reports, has been increasing, and the number of bodies of water with confirmed blooms has been increasing. However, we don't know that this means that there are more HABs occurring. It could also just be that as people become more familiar with HABs, they're more likely to report them, and so we're receiving more reports of HABs. So this is something that we don't really know about, but this is also an area you can help with. Because part of what we would need to answer this is just more data on what people are seeing. So this is one of the reasons we want people to be sure to report when they're seeing things, so we can be sure that the data is getting more and more accurate over time. So I mentioned that some of the main causes of HABs are warm, calm water, high levels of nutrients, and nutrients can come from a variety of sources. You'll be hearing some more about this later on, but those sources could include fertilizer runoff, animal waste, septic systems, stormwater runoff, and there's other events that impact the occurrence of HABs as well. So there's many different reasons why HABs are a problem. Among those are risks to human and animal health, nuisance, odor, and visual effects. So this can really impact tourism and recreational activities negatively, as well as decreasing water quality and ecosystem health, and potentially even drinking water. So if you have a HABs occurring near a drinking water intake, there are ways that you can treat that, but it's going to require some more expense to do that. So the main point here is if you do see something that you think is a HAB, make sure to report it. So you can email any photos and the location to algaebloom@michigan.gov. The photos are really important because as you saw from some of the photos I showed you earlier, we can't always tell if it's a HAB from a photo, but we can make a pretty good guess. And we can often rule out some things that it may not be. So it's really important to send in those photos. And then there may be testing conducted afterwards, and local health departments may issue advisories depending on the results of that testing. Finally, if you want to view current live HABs reports for Michigan, there's a map that you can do this through EGLE, the Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy. And so this is a screenshot of the reports from 2023. You just want to keep in mind that this data is never going to be 100% complete. And so keep in mind those visual reminders of HABs that might tell you that a HAB is in the area, because that's always going to be more real time than these reports are. All right, finally, I'd just like to acknowledge the whole group that worked together to bring you this webinar, and everyone who contributed photos to it and content, and pause for any questions.
Thanks, Erica. This is Geneva Langland again. We've got a lot of awesome questions in the Q&A, and I think some of them might be addressed in upcoming presentations, but a couple that we might circle back to now. Can there be an odor associated with a HAB, or what sort of smells might someone notice?
That's a good question, and I actually don't know about that. I think that there can be an odor because I know that can impact recreation and even drinking water, but I don't know what it smells like. I don't know if any of the other panelists want to weigh in on that.
I believe a lot of times if it's bad enough, you can smell dimethyl sulfide is one of the primary outgassing components, and it has to be a pretty severe and really dense and decaying area of the blooms to smell it, but you definitely can, and it's got kind of a sulfidey smell. If it's bad enough and you get close enough, you can actually feel a little twinge in your nose. But that's the primary I know of.
Thank you.
Let's see, a couple other questions to get to now. So just confirming, do we ever get red colored blooms in Michigan, or is that just a saltwater effect in places like Florida?
Yeah, so those photos, all the photos I showed were from Michigan. So yes, those red blooms can occur in Michigan. It's not the same as red tide. Red tide is involves a different organism than we have here, but we can get blooms red in color.
All right, we have one person wondering, can Cladophora ever become a harmful algal bloom, or is it a different sort of problematic algae that really contributes more to problems when it dies and decays and bacteria breed in it?
So my understanding is that it would not be considered a HAB because it doesn't produce toxins. But like you said, Geneva, that it can cause a nuisance in other ways. So I don't know if Julianne or Eric want to weigh in on that, but that's my understanding.
From a health perspective, it can sequester E. coli in it, or sometimes botulism.
But would it still be considered a HAB then, or would it just be considered?
It still would not be considered a HAB.
Okay, thank you.
So it can be a nuisance, but not technically a harmful algal bloom. Is it possible to form an educated guess about an algal bloom's toxicity based on microscope observation, or does that really require specific lab tests?
I don't know the answer to that one, so if anyone else wants to weigh in.
It really requires specific lab tests. There's the strain of the cyanobacteria needs to have the genes to produce the toxin, and then whether or not they're actually expressing those genes might be even different over time and in different conditions.
Great, thank you, Alex.